Randall Smathers, and on behalf of Rutland Free Library, I am welcoming you this evening to our snapshot event. Every problem is now a technology problem with Jessamyn West. We extend our thanks to our partners at Vermont Humanities, as well as to the generous underwriters who make it possible for us to offer such rich and robust programming. The sponsor of the entire Snapshot series with Vermont Humanities is the Vermont Department of Libraries, Institute of Museum and Library Services, and the Elma Gibbs Donchian Foundation. Tonight's event is also sponsored by the Preservation Trust of Vermont, and all Rutland Free Library programming is sponsored by our friends of Rutland Free Library and their fabulous monthly book sales, which we love. Tonight, before we come together from across the state to listen, to learn, and be inspired in community. But before we begin, I have a few brief housekeeping items. Primarily is that our next Snapshot event, hosted by the Brownell Library, is My Day in the Hills, the Story, Songs, and Soul of the Sound of Music, with Stephanie Weigand at 6:30 p.m. And please do be sure to register online to receive a link, and that is through Vermont Humanities website. And it is now my pleasure to introduce you to our speaker. Jessamyn West is a library technologist from Randolph. She is a nationally known speaker, writer, and educator on issues facing today's libraries. Her blog, focusing on libraries and politics, librarian.net, is one of the longest-running librarian websites. A regular columnist for Computers and Libraries magazine, she wrote Without a Net, Librarians Bridging the Digital Divide. She was on the advisory board to the Wikimedia Foundation and currently works as a community manager for the Flickr Foundation. For the past 20 years, she has spent most of her time working with her local community as a hands-on technology coordinator, technology educator, my apologies, and is actually a former member of the staff here at Rutland Free Library. So it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Jessamyn West. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Randall. Hi, and thanks. For those of you joining us from away, you'll be amused to know that we were having some issues getting all the computers to talk to all the other computers. So I'm Jessamyn. I am a technologist with a library background. I work at Kimball Library in Randolph, Vermont, and I help people with computers. I'll be talking about that a lot this evening. And I used to work here, as Randall says, at the Outreach Librarian way back when. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the last few years, which, hey, there have been a few years of learning and opportunities. And I say that with kind of the air quotes because I maybe would have preferred to learn a little less in the last couple of years, given my druthers. So for those of you who are checking in from other places, there's a web address up on the slides. It's librarian.net/talks, TALKS/VHC24, and that has a list of links to more information. If you want to follow along with the slides, you can, and if you just want to read my talk alongside me reading it to see what I'm ad-libbing and what I'm not, you're more than welcome to. So I think many of us, for the last couple of years, were forced out of our comfort zones, not only by our jobs, but with the entire restructuring of society's interactive bits as a result of the COVID-19 virus. And some people's quickly shifting needs vis-a-vis the library, which is where I came in. We still have some of the same social split, with some people needing to come to the library for international travel advice, and other people still not being super comfortable being unmasked in public. So we're going to talk about that. This says it's a story about COVID, but really it's more of a story about technology and how it adapts. And for me, the crux of working with technology, which is what I've done since I was in library school in the last century, and working at libraries in specific, is this idea of sort of turtles all the way down, which is kind of a nerd saying, but I think it deserves a wider audience. The idea alludes to one description of the world in Hindu, Chinese, and some indigenous American mythologies, where the idea is there's like a world, and it's flat in the picture, but please ignore that, and it's on top of elephants, and the elephants are on top of the turtle. And when people ask, they say, well, what's that turtle standing on top of? And some dude's like, well, don't you get it? It's turtles all the way down. And in the library, the similar equivalent is somebody comes in with a basic question, right? They've got a question about their email or something. But then it turns out they don't know their password. And so we go to reset their password, and it's all good, but then it turns out they don't know the secret question in order to be able to reset their password. You know, like maybe it's like, what's your favorite movie? And they set up the password 15 years ago. So the question isn't what's your favorite movie, it's what was your favorite movie in 2008? And that's a harder question, right? And then the fraud protection stuff kicks in, and an email account won't even let them reset their password if they're coming from an unfamiliar IP address. So maybe the IP address of the library as opposed to the IP address of their home. And so in order to help them with their email, you have to fix anywhere from 2 to 10 other technology problems first. And like, don't get me wrong, I'm not complaining. I love doing this work. But for the person who just wants to get to their email, it can really seem like a ridiculous set of sort of nested complications. It's kind of like that Carl Sagan quote where he says, you know, if you really want to make an apple pie from scratch, you have to invent the entire universe. So COVID made this type of situation significantly worse, right? And it made it worse for digitally divided people, even more than it was bad for everyone. Because digitally divided people suddenly had technology between them and everything. The stuff that made up their lives, and us at the library, the people who were helping them. So this is a slide, if you can't really see, there's a list of technology things that I learned, stuff like how to get on TikTok, how to order food from a bunch of different places, how to edit Wikidata, and then non-technology things that I learned, like using a mandolin without slicing off the top of my finger, or working with the State Library for the Blind, or that kind of thing. So for a lot of people, you know, I like learning stuff. This was not bad for me or hard for me, but for a lot of people, maybe they don't, right? I live alone, I work from home. It was not super complicated. I could manage my situation fairly decently. My houseplants were happy, and it turned out I liked traveling a lot less. For a lot of people, they didn't have that good fortune, right? Maybe they had a bunch of kids at home, all who needed to do online school, or maybe they've got other things going on, and so learning could really take a back seat to some more basic level stuff on the hierarchy of needs. And so one of the main operating principles that I had with my work is let's how to figure out how to give the most help that is also the least intrusive, because while I might find this nerdy stuff super fun, a lot of times other people are just trying to solve this problem so that they can get on to the next thing. So less intrusive can also be a personal boundary, but I'll talk about that in a little bit later. So in-person people know this, but if there's non-in-person people, I live in a town which is big for the county that I live in, but otherwise pretty small. Randolph, Vermont. COVID did not hit us quite as hard, not only in Vermont, but in Orange County even, inside of Vermont, as it did in other places. You know, we had a governor who was like, okay about it for the most part, showed okay leadership for the most part, and our state library showed a lot of leadership for which I am grateful. And so as a job, besides talking to people like I do now and writing and doing digital divide research, I also do this thing at my public library called drop-in time. And this is literally like hanging out for a couple hours every week in a room that's one of those like big table rooms that you probably think of when you think of a library. And people come in with their technology questions, whether it's something about their wristwatch or their phone or their laptop, or sometimes like describing a thing with their printer, or sometimes bringing their printer in and we try to figure out why it can't talk to the computer that is at home. And we just try to puzzle it out, because why not? And there's often a lot of people in at the same time, which can actually be kind of good, because sometimes there's definitely this sense where they're like, well, sure, Jessamyn, you know this because you're you, but I'm me and this is complicated. But having them be in a room with a bunch of different people with different levels of knowledge and ability can help them feel like there's ways to figure out the technology stuff, even if they're not meeting the lady that works in the library. And so that's a really useful thing. And for me, listening to other people talk to other people about technology gives me some insight into how they're seeing their technology world. So here's a picture of us in the room at the library. It's a couple of years old now. That's Brian, who's on the outside. Brian works in the stove factory that is in my town, and what he's trying to figure out is how to get Bruins tickets, which he has, but he needs to have them on his phone, and he needs to have them on his phone so that when he shows up at the Bruins game, he can see the Bruins game. So this isn't just like a, let's try and make it work for you, Brian. This is like, it needs to work for Brian. So we're trying to figure that out. Elliot is the next person. Elliot is, or was actually, my intern. So he, in this picture, was 15. And part of why he came to Drop In Time is both because he's really good with computers, but also because he's kind of learning the people skill parts of helping people with a computer. Because a lot of times, the challenge is the people who are good with computer are not as good with people. The people who are good with people are often not as good with the computer. And one of the reasons I think I'm okay at what I do is because I'm a little good at both of them, which can be sort of helpful. So Martha, she's in the back. Martha's working on her anti-marijuana website. Good luck, Martha. We helped her with that on WordPress. And then Sally on the right is trying to figure out why her calendar won't update on iCloud. And it will probably surprise no one to know that turning it off and on again actually solved her iCloud problem. And we've since gotten rid of that microfilm reader that's in the back. But this is sort of what we do. The people I work with are mostly older, though not all older. Brian is definitely younger than me. The technology is mostly older. So it's a lot of people that may have, a laptop that's 10 years old and they're trying to figure out how to do something that's a little bit more modern on it. And they usually have multiple challenges, right? So maybe they've got, an older computer and as well they have a shaky hand. So they need to figure out something that's going to work at an accessibility level in addition to getting the computer its own sort of accessibility stuff. And so in March of 2020, which now, 4 years ago, right, was the first day I really remember everything starting to stop. And it may have been sooner than that, but basically that's when our library closed. We were available by appointment through that summer. And that summer was when Vermont was like doing good, and we went like 99 days and everybody was fine before we had sort of a COVID death. I think I'm done talking about COVID at this point. But then it closed back down as the weather got bad, and then opened again in 2021, but then it closed again at the end of November 2021 and was closed until kind of early 2022, which, not that long ago. And it was a really long winter. And one of the things, as you'll probably remember, is it happened very suddenly. All of a sudden, things that were open were closed. And so people who had to make sure kids could go to school, have their basic needs met, whatever the thing was you maybe used to do in person, now you need to figure out how to do it in sort of a technology-mediated way. And every problem immediately became a technology problem. And so for me, the local technologist and the lady that works at the library, without a bunch of other mitigating circumstances like kids who I had to get school at home or a job I needed to go out of the house to, I became a lot of people's local tech resource. Happy to do it, but it was interesting to sort of watch it happen. And so I'm just going to talk about some of the things that I did, and surprisingly, most of it really wasn't as much about technology, and I honestly think some of the things, about technology are things that I know, but a lot of it is just kind of how you interact, how you problem solve within a realm, and this realm happens to be technology. So the first step as we retool to meet our new challenges was to make sure people were connected, right? Can't go to online school if you're not online. Can't order your groceries online if you're not online, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so getting connected could mean a lot of things. For some people, it was the basics of literally getting internet into their homes. For other people, it was figuring out who was in their support network or maybe their bubble who would be able to help them with things in a way that was safe or that they felt safe with. So mutual aid networks we saw springing up in communities, and a lot of them in smaller communities especially were supported by the local library, which I thought was great. It was really good to see. And the good news was, after the initial panic, there was also some money for this. And, I have a friend who lived in a rural location in Randolph. You know, like many towns, we've got kind of a main downtown, and then a lot of people live up in the hills. And his only option until 2021, where he lived, was like really crummy cell service, and he couldn't get anything else. There was no cable internet, there was no broadband, he lived in the woods, so he couldn't get satellite, no Starlink, it was a mess. But once money started rolling in to help people get to online school, get to their online jobs, etc., our local fiber internet company, which is EC Fiber, I don't think you guys have them here, but they serve about 20 towns kind of in central Vermont. Suddenly they got money to build out their network, and then suddenly my friend who lived up in the hills could get broadband at his home, which was life-changing for him. In fact, when I told him I was going to give this talk, he's like, tell them about my internet! So now I have. And the digital divide's about connectivity, but in a lot of different ways. And one way was just people not having the internet available, but another part is not being able to afford it, which we're sort of familiar with. And many tech companies sort of poo-pooed the idea that money was the issue here, saying, people just don't want to get online. And research has shown, and that URL that I gave you at the beginning has links to research in case you're curious. I mean, I talk fast and I talk about a lot of things, but if there's one part of it that's interesting, check the list of links. There's probably a see also thing where you could read more about it. And so research has shown it isn't true, right? That if you make broadband cheap enough, people will want it. And the emergency broadband benefit went to address that, and it did get a lot more people online. And so looking into the people, families in particular, who didn't have internet at home and needed it for stuff, identified other problems with getting people online, including like logistical problems. So maybe the broadband company goes up the road, and that's cool, but maybe your house has a half-mile driveway. And so getting internet to your house involves somebody digging a trench to your house from the road, and those trench digger people don't work for free. And so then you've got to get money to pay the person to dig the trench, and that's part of getting internet to your house. And that's a different logistical problem than just fighting with Comcast about how you don't want to, Xfinity now, are they? Fighting with Xfinity about how you don't want to pay a lot for your internet. And so a lot of that involved organizing. The mutual aid networks were really helpful for that. This little screenshot down in the corner is the Randolph area mutual aid network. It's not the best website, but at the end of the day, it didn't have to be a good website. It had to be a website that worked, and it was a bunch of like nested spreadsheets that everybody could edit. So if you were trying to figure out who could help you get a ride to the doctor or help you get somebody to deliver groceries to your home, you could find people. Although I think the really best part of this entire mutual aid network was that there was a phone number at the top of the page and a rotating group of neighbors who would be responsible for answering that phone, and sometimes, I'll be honest, reading the spreadsheet to you. But if, you know, whatever works, right? And we did find that there was a lot of whatever works. The website is still online, but it's kind of what we in the tech industry call abandonware, which is it's still online, but it's not actually super functional, and I'm not really sure if that's better or worse, honestly. Like, I have opinions about many technology things, but that is not the project that I want to undertake, but it is interesting to continue to look at. And I mentioned phone calling. A lot of connectivity stuff wasn't just about computers. Like, I'm one of those Gen X people who doesn't like the phone and basically went all of January not having my ringer turned on because I just don't want to talk to anybody. But for many people, honestly most people, phones were and continue to be like a real lifeline for them. We had a rural library in Vermont in a town called Georgia, our Georgia, who sort of figured out who their library frequent flyers were. Like, they looked at who was using the catalog, who was ordering the most books, who had been checking out the most books. And they made some phone calls in like early COVID era, being like, hey, how are things? Did you know you can get ebooks on your phone or laptop through Libby or, you know, other things? Did you know we have, you know, access to the DVDs? Did you know we do curbside? Did you know you can get something printed at the library and we'll leave it for you outside in a way? And one of the things that they found when they made this like frequent flyer list was they expected their frequent flyers were all going to be the older members of their community, and they weren't really entirely. And in Randolph, my friend, who's a little younger than me, we go dog walking. We became friends over sort of early COVID era because she was walking her dog every day and I was just walking me every day, as one did. And she actually checks out the second most books at our library, and she's solidly in her 40s. So I think it just depends. But sometimes it's not until you look that you realize that these things are different sort of than you expect. And when I mentioned this on social media, because like you do, like, oh, my library here in Vermont did a really interesting thing, blah, blah, blah. I got a lot of people like me being like, my library ever called me on the phone, like, I'd be so mad. And to be fair, when my library calls me on the phone, I'm like, didn't you see the part in my account where it says, never call me, send me an email, but everybody isn't me, right? And so most of the people that they talk to in Georgia, Vermont, very small, were actually really happy to have someone checking in on them, and that was a useful lesson. And it was also useful for like weird old grinchy me, who I don't like phone calls, but that doesn't mean people don't like phone calls. And so from an accessibility standpoint, I have a friend, Marion, she's down in the corner here. You can see her, she's wearing like rubber gloves and a mask, and outside with a hat, and we sat at opposite ends of the picnic table and had lunch together. And she, very hard of hearing, and she told me about caption phones, where you can get a phone, and as someone talks, it's not TTY, which is like a whole system with operators and stuff. Caption phone mostly just does kind of voice recognition, as I understand it. Voice recognition, and then there's like captions of what somebody's saying on the phone, and then you can get it on your devices too, it doesn't have to be. And so for her, it meant that she could use the phone reasonably with a severe hearing problem, and they're free. And so when Miriam told me this, then I become the librarian who knows that, and I can identify other people in my community who might need this and let them know. And that's sort of the biggest message as I sort of keep going here. So people with access to a phone, even if they're not great at online tools, could connect and contact with our ABLE library. So that's audio, braille, large print, and ebooks at the state library. And those people could get the books in different formats, but again, you need to know that they're available. And you need someone to help connect you and to help you figure out how to get there, right? You're not gonna see signs everywhere like, hey, you'll see that sign in the library, but maybe you need to talk to a person who knows a thing, etc. And now that our Vermont state librarian, who was our state librarian through early COVID, has moved to the National Library for the Blind, I can keep hoping that we'll get better, and more sort of PR materials. And speaking of ABLE and just accessibility things generally, one of the things that was the fussiest was figuring out accessibility tools on all the various teleconferencing apps, right? We talk about Zoom as if it's the only teleconferencing app, but there was also like talking to people over Skype. There's also Microsoft Teams. There's also Google Meet. There's also Jitsi. There's also BlueJeans. There's also, I don't even know what people are using. Those are like the top 6. Each of them has a special little place in it where you can, if you're lucky, enable captions so that people can sort of read along with sort of auditory information. So Zoom got sued at the end of 2020 because they weren't making captions available. And so then they made live captions. So it used to be you could have a person who would type the captions, and that was like the plan. The live captions were only available if you paid for it. Then they got sued. Then they decided, oh, we'll make this available for everybody. But it still, for a long period of time, was a hassle to enable it. You had to turn it on for your account, then you had to turn it on for the event, then you had to make sure other people knew that they had it. If you had a presenter, they had to have it turned on differently. Each session, they didn't work in breakout rooms. It was shameful. And Zoom was kind of doing that because they get paid a little bit of money if you decide it's easier to get a paid account and do it that way. So you remember Marion from the last slide. She was attending Zoom book groups at my library without captions, which was completely aggravating for her. One of the things I love about Marion is she's like mad all the time. about like lack of accessibility, like at the movie theater, at the library, and she's always like, Jessamyn. And she's always telling me I have to go get a job doing accessibility stuff, to which I reply, I have a job, but if I can help with the one I have, let me know. And so she basically kept telling the library, oh, can you please turn on captions for the book group, because I can't understand anything anybody's saying, it's super aggravating. And they were like, we've tried. And she was like, not good enough, Jessamyn, can you talk to them? And, and they were like, we spent months. And it was hard for them, and they did spend a long time. But also, like Brian and his Bruins tickets, the end of the day is not, you tried, the end of the day is the accessibility thing works, really. And it's a tough lesson, because we tried should matter, and it does, but in this case, they were like, well, you tried asking Jessamyn? And then I sort of helped, and we got it working, and it was good, but it is a useful lesson to remember that it's not just our patrons that are digitally divided. Sometimes it's the staff at the libraries who are doing their very best, but just don't know how to Google an answer or figure out a thing that isn't like the help file says. Because they were following the help files were just out of date, blah, 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 etc. So if public libraries are for everyone, we have accessible bathrooms and elevators and lifts and ramps and all the other stuff, this is the kind of thing we should also have down because it's all part of the same thing. I always feel like it's weird sometimes that we don't. So above all, the big thing I ask and re-ask, like with the problems I was seeing, is whether it was literally a technology problem. Is somebody having trouble learning technology or interacting with the technology, or is it just an accessibility issue? Like, is someone having trouble using their computer, or can they just not use a mouse very well? Because there's like lots of different ways to interact with a computer, and mouse is only one of them. Is someone bad at email, or do they just need the font to be bigger, right? I was just at the DMV earlier today, registering a car, and I went to my friend's house to get the title signed over, but I wasn't wearing my glasses, because I'm one of those, like, I only need glasses for reading, and soon I'll need them for other things, and I forget to bring them with me sometimes, and I forgot to bring them with me, and so I signed the title where it says seller, only I was the buyer, and bless the people at Vermont DMV who just let me fill out an entirely other form to say, yeah, I signed on the wrong line, and I'll do it on the other way, right? But like, accessibility issue, it's just me and my dumb glasses, but my friend didn't have them, and I thought I was signing on the proper line. It affects all of us. Is someone bad with the iPhone, or do they just need to use dictation because typing with thumbs isn't easy for them for, various reasons? How many of these supposed technology issues are just people not having the right settings on the technology that they currently have? Because the two issues, technology issue, accessibility issue, are approached in similar ways, but the people or the resources you may enlist to help you may be different. So the trend among all of these things was scaffolding, right? You get a skill, you learn a little bit more about it, you know a little bit more, and that leads you to the next skill. Linking someone to a person with a skill isn't as good as teaching them the skill, but it helps. So one of my foundational documents, and there's two quotations from this up on the screen, it's literally like a pamphlet by a technologist called Phil Agre, Agre? And it's just called How to Help Someone Use a Computer. It's from the 90s. And so these are two short excerpts. Your primary goal is not to solve their problem. Your primary goal is to help them become one notch more capable of solving the problem themselves. Up in the corner, knowledge lives in communities, not individuals. A computer user who's not part of a community of computer users is going to have a harder time with it than one who is. So that's me on the left trying to help John fix a corrupt Outlook file while my iffy internet was threatening to hang up on me. And on the left, it's me and a different guy named John with his dad, Mel, who was 95 at the time. Mel needed to get something notarized, which was a thing that the laws said we could do over Zoom, which was pretty exciting. Not anymore, they don't let you. But he needed help getting on Zoom so that he could get something notarized over Zoom, right? And so his son came over, And we got it all sorted out, and it was good. So John on the left could probably learn some techniques like Googling the support files or maybe even calling tech support. John on the right was the human connection who could help Mel take the steps that he needed to solve his problems, which actually themselves were not technological. So knowing this difference, who can help themselves, who's going to always need some help, is a really important part of this work. So step number 2, I showed you a few of the tools in the last section, but here are a few more, and you'll notice that a lot of them are, for lack of a better word, analog. The most important aspect for me was taking things down to the basics. If people are comfortable with email, try to funnel things like a tech support link or a handout or a link to a chat through email if they're good at that. Some things required in-person attention when in-person options weren't available. In some cases, people who wanted to, like, let's say, get rid of a laptop that they needed their hard drive wiped because they were really worried about that, or people who had a new iPad and they needed to set up, sometimes we literally do drop-off service. Leave it at the library, we'll take it inside like the Lorax, and then we'll leave it outside for you when it's ready. And we sort of worked that way. So we still did drop-in time, we just did it virtually. People would call the library or they'd email me, and we'd start a conversation. So it was less come by the library between 2 to 4 on Thursday, which is what it is now, 2 to 4:30, and more like, tell me what's up, and I'll see how I can help. And the tasks became iterative. You do a little bit, you get the results from one set of tasks, you roll it into the next task until people got to where they wanted. So recognizing in 2020 and 2021 in particular, that people more than usual had time. This meant that in all but the direst emergencies, we could do kind of our slow motion scaffolding and not have to fix things all at once. So we'd send home some instructions, maybe with a handout. This is a slide about how to search the internet handout that I made a fairly long time ago, but it actually still mostly holds up. And then we'd circle back and see how it went. Often novice users would feel really bad if the advice you give them doesn't work. And so you'd have to talk in very general, gentle terms so that they wouldn't feel like they were hurting your feelings if you hadn't already solved the problem. And this is Ronnie in this picture. She was my former landlady, also at that time in her 90s, looking at a handout that I made her, which is literally a drawing of her trackpad on her laptop. And like, touch here, don't touch over here, or this goes up and down, but over, you know, where to click and where not to. And she kind of keep it by her computer as she sort of navigated. She couldn't use a mouse at all because this, like moving this finger independently from the other fingers just didn't work for her. But that's fine. There's lots of ways to interact with technology. And one of the things I hear a lot in drop-in time is people regretting that things don't come with manuals. And I would often mention that they do, but those manuals are now PDFs, which is sort of one more turtle away from the thing. I got to download, so like the car that I got is like a 2002 pickup truck, very great. And I was able to just download the 280-page manual for the truck just from the internet, like Google, click, boom, and now I'm all set. Didn't come with a manual, but now I have it. Very cool for me, who knows how to do that. Vexing for someone who just gets it and can't figure out how to turn the radio on, or in my case, off. So people want a list of steps, and what they wind up with is a flow chart or a diagram, and I sympathize. It is rough. For things that had a lot of fiddly setups, users often have a really difficult time when you're telling them to click a thing they actually can't see on their screen. So like, you know, Gmail's famous for this, but like, click the thing, and then you can see the thing that has the other thing. And I'd often give people a set of screenshots outlining the thing. First, click this, and then you'll see this. Then click that. Next, etc. Now that's great for me, who can like make a handout and knows how to use a tool to like draw on pictures. And the good news is one of the things sort of the COVID era really gave us was more online tools that more average people could use. Like Canva exploded over the last 4 or 5 years, even though like it's been around for a while, but people used it more and more and more, being home, you know, home, school at home, etc. Suddenly people sort of are knowing how to do those things. And so, I'd send an email with these pictures in line. People who could get to their email could keep that information or print it if printing was the thing that made it work for them. Or if they were looking at something on their computer that they didn't understand, I would often explain to them how to take a photo, like even with their phone. Like take a photo with your phone and email it to me or text it to me or what have you. Or doing screenshots. Like there's key commands for screenshots on all the major Mac, PC, Linux platforms. You could just show them how to do it and then where to find the screenshot, and then you could see what they were seeing. Sometimes people could get as far as using Zoom or Skype screen share options or maybe Windows remote assistance. But usually we could get to the point where we could explain the thing enough so that we wouldn't have to. And sometimes people find screen sharing a little invasive because suddenly you're like looking at their desktop and you're like, whoo, yeah, that's a lot. Like, no wonder you're having trouble with this. And then we just sort of move forward. But not everybody wants that, and I don't blame them. So sometimes people would have a situation that maybe couldn't be fixed remotely. And it was helpful for people to have the problem sort of ordered and understood, and then they might actually have to call like a support person. And most people didn't want to do that, and I sometimes feel that drop-in time is what's called like the streetlight effect. The guy's like lost his keys in the dark, he's looking over here, somebody's like, what's going on? Oh, lost my keys. Oh, I'll help you look for them. Oh, I didn't lose them over here, I lost them over. Oh, why are you searching here? Oh, the light's better here. And I feel like people sometimes come to drop-in time because they want to talk to me about their computer problems, not Xfinity, but sometimes they have to talk to Xfinity in order to do that. And so some of what I would do is talk through how to have a support phone call, what you need to tell them, what the vocabulary is for your situation. Maybe I'd be available by text while they were doing that thing. This phone is Sharon's phone. Something, as you can probably see, is wrong with the screen. Maybe she sat on it, maybe it always looked like that. Hard to say, but she needed to call someone to see if it was fixable because I only have so much I can do. We turned it on, turned it off again, tried a couple display things, nothing. So I talked her through how to describe what she was seeing. And this came up again just a few weeks ago. We had that terrible winter storm. It was a terrible winter storm here too, right? I couldn't get out of the driveway for the day, so I was just at home. I could not come to drop-in time. And Irene's email was broken. And you'd swear I only work with people who are 90 and above, but many people are not. But Irene is also above 90, but she was at home and she was stuck and her email wasn't working. She called the library to see if I was there and I wasn't. And she was trying to sort of figure it out. And I wound up calling her on the phone. You can tell how much I care about Irene because I made a phone call. But at the end of the day, she couldn't log on because Xfinity had had a massive data breach, which maybe you heard about. And essentially the way they dealt with it was just like, we're gonna just reset everybody's password. And so for someone like me, you just get an email, it's like, we had to reset your password, click this, and you just log into a website and you change it, right? Unclear if Irene had heard from them, but it was fairly clear she had to reset her password. We tried to step through resetting her password, but the cell phone number that was on the account was not one she had any longer, which you see all the time in public libraries, right? People don't have the same cell phone number, they don't live in the same place, they're not at the same IP address, and it's complicated for them. And so Irene needed to talk to a human being at Xfinity because she didn't have any other backup information in her account, didn't have another email address. She had one, and I thought that was pretty good. But she had to talk to Xfinity, who was always kind of trying to put it back on her, like, well, you need to update your browser first, which I'm here to tell you, she did not. But it got that person off the phone who's probably not wanting to deal with this password reset issue. I could not figure it out. I'm still not 100% sure Irene is back with her email, and I think about it. And patience is a real part of it. Honestly believing in your own mind that this work is worth doing, and that people learn at their own speeds and in their own ways, and they're all okay. So one of the things I like most about this work is remembering how many different ways there are to do computers, because I do computers in my own particular way, and I'm part of a group of online nerds, and we all like do computers in a pretty similar way. And seeing the creative and inventive ways that people use technology to solve their own problems, or the way they understand an interaction in a way that I might not, like, I've forgotten what the world was when computers were endless possibilities, where they could do the magic that you saw in like the TV ads, and like everything could like be helped with technology. You know, it's not necessarily in a bad way, but I really like that energy. And so this example is a favorite, the little pictures on the right side. I was helping a woman try to figure out where her documents were saving on her computer. And Microsoft would very badly like you to save your documents to the cloud. Don't exactly know why, I assume because they charge you for that. But basically, save your documents to the cloud, and she very badly wanted to save the documents to her computer for various reasons. And so I showed her how to click the save icon in Microsoft Word, you know, which is a floppy disk, because that's a modern metaphor, right? So I'm like, it's a floppy disk. And she's like, the bank? I'm like, what? And she's like, it's a bank. It's where you save things. No idea. What? Really? And then I looked at the emoji, and they're like very similar. And I was like, oh my God, the little bank. And so now I just call it the bank, because I go to the bank more often than I look at the floppy disk, I tell you what. And, awesome, right? So a lot of my work, as you can see, really isn't computer at all. It's helping people get a little bit better at a task or a skill that's challenging for them, and managing kind of the psychological aspect of it. Being like, don't give up, you're doing cool. And I think that can be what differentiates library technologists from the average kind of person who is good at computers. We tend to have empathy, and we can use that to help people feel better about their interactions, and not just learn the rote interactions. And feeling okay about your interactions is really what keeps people moving forward with it, and not just being like, computer, to heck with it. Like, I taught email classes in this very room 20 years ago, I don't know, and I would teach it with flip charts, like a piece of paper, and we would draw like to and CC and BCC, and we would talk about it, and it was great, right? And we had computers then too. It was just, that was the easiest way to talk to sort of really novice users about really basic email concepts. And we would have people who would come in, and often they would sit through an entire class just to ask a question about their specific situation that they didn't really have another person to ask. And I would have people who showed up who had been paying AOL for months for an account they just weren't using anymore, because they assumed, and that was back when AOL cost them real money, they assumed the problem was them. And they felt embarrassed about that. And so they just kind of sent money. Well, and also because if you try to cancel, you have to fight with somebody at AOL about it. But still, like, I carry those people with me, because that whole idea that you're just so embarrassed about a thing that you can't do, that you'll just keep hurling money towards a thing, is a thing that sort of encourages me to keep encouraging people to not give up, because there are options. And so a digital divide concept that I think is helpful is the concept of digital readiness. So you can kind of see these two columns here. It's a slightly older concept, but I really think it's useful. People need to not only be able to do the mechanics of the technology, the clicking, the double clicking, which, surprising, those are two different skills. The right clicking, totally different skill. But also to be able to do slightly more sophisticated things like troubleshooting, looking things up, figuring out what's a scam and what's a real website. The last year or two, especially. And these things take time, and some of it is a personality thing, but working on confidence helps a lot. And sometimes it's as much telling people about what they don't need to do as what they, are doing in the face of advertisers or friends or family telling them otherwise. I often see people at drop-in time with people being like, you need to get on Facebook, get off Facebook, get an Apple Watch, get rid of your iPhone, get a Mac, don't get a Mac. Like whatever the thing is, there are people with strong opinions, and then there are people who maybe don't feel super tech savvy, who maybe don't have strong opinions. And a lot of times they're looking for somebody who's not a family member or somebody trying to sell them something to, you know, get more of a read on it. Like, do you need to pay for virus protection? Maybe not. You need to use two-factor authentication on your email? Like, it's a good idea, but do you have to? I mean, it depends on your email provider at this point in time, but maybe you don't. It's more secure, but yeah. Do you need to upgrade to a more expensive broadband package because the one you have isn't working? No, almost certainly not. You need to figure out how to fix the one you have that's working in order to figure out if what you have is enough. But the cable company will always tell you that you need to upgrade to a better package because that's their job. They're the cable company. This is really not just all like one long rant about Xfinity, I swear. But they come up a lot because they're the broadband game in town. Should a tech support call take 2 hours? Probably not, right? But I hear that a lot from people. They were like, I was on the phone with tech support for an hour and a half. And I'm like, that sounds wrong. Like, let's figure out how to make these things go better for you. And so here's an example on the screen of kind of why this is important. This is an image of a printed email. So somebody brought an email that they had printed into drop-in time. She had to make a payment over the phone because she had a phone bill that was overdue. She got an email from the phone company that had like the bill in it, and it looked like this. So it's like a printout, your bill, whatever, but you can kind of see there's like a little like, it's supposed to look handwritten at the bottom, like smiley face, and thank you for choosing CCI, which I guess is what Fairpoint turned into. Fairpoint used to be Bell Atlantic. Like, you can't sort of keep them straight, right? But it looked weird to her. Like a little smiley face at the bottom? That doesn't sound like the phone company. And her kids are always yelling at her, don't get scammed, Mom! Like, you know, and so she called the telephone company to ask if their bills had a little smiley face at the bottom of them. And the people at the other end of the support line were like, no, but they don't know. And they connected her to the fraud department, who also said no, but they didn't know, apparently. And so Connie, who felt kind of vulnerable and unsure, and her kids have been yelling at her for a while about this, goes to her bank and talks to her bank's fraud department, who suggests, because they're the bank, well, if you're not sure, you should close this account entirely and then open a new account. And then all the headache that's involved with that, new checks, like, and so she does that all over a goofy email signature done probably by the marketing people, but a bunch of people at the same company who didn't know that that's what the email looked like. And so a lady who was just trying to do her best wound up with an incredible hassle. And, you know, maybe she could have contacted somebody earlier to double check, but she didn't know. She thought she was doing the right things and just wound up on the wrong direction. And so a lot of what I did during COVID years was helping people practice. Practice sending an attachment, practice sending a text, practice Skyping, practice getting on Zoom. So this is Shirley, a picture, who had a violin recital with a family member, little kid in her family. And she didn't want to miss it, but she didn't want to show up, well, looking like this, frankly. This is the top of her head, kind of. And so we worked it out. I helped her straighten her camera. We learned to turn her camera off. We learned to turn it back on. Because like Zoom used to like drop you into a room without your camera on, and a lot of people couldn't figure out how to turn the camera on, and maybe they wanted to be on the camera, but couldn't figure it out, and they were just like, well, I guess I'm just off camera forever now. So, you know, turn it off, turn it on, mute, unmute, like, very important. And, you know, other people maybe wanted to use their phone to do a thing, right? Like, my friend told me there's an app, you can hold it up to a bird sound and it'll tell you what the bird is, right? Merlin? But they didn't know what app it was, right? They could kind of get to the app store and they type in like bird stuff and they just get like so much stuff, and they didn't know which one was right until me being like, oh, it's that one. You can tell because it's Cornell, and they are the people, and here's how you look. But like somebody's always going to try to sell you a bird app when you want a Bird app for free, and this Bird app also happened to be free. So it would be good to help that person connect to what they want, not be sold something they didn't want. So I downloaded so many apps just to like figure out what app someone was talking about, or maybe they were like, I want a good crossword puzzle app, or puzzle app, or draw a mustache on my kid's face picture app, like whatever the thing was. And I'd be like, well, instead of like, I would just download 7 apps on my phone, figure out which one was good and delete 6 of them, but for them, they just kind of wanted one app and they just wanted it to kind of work, right? So lots of apps, learned a lot of stuff. Try most of it, as far as I'm concerned. And all of this, the last category, only works if people know that you're there. So outreach, what I did at this library is probably my favorite thing to do that isn't interacting with computers. I made friendly videos for the library newsletter. I posted how to ask a good question stuff on the front porch forum so that people, when they got to drop in time, would kind of know maybe what they were trying to figure out. I let the mutual aid networks, the people that answered the phone, know that I was a person who could help with computer stuff. I was also a notary, so occasionally someone needed like an in-person notary. That was also me. You know, when I was notarizing for people, I would let them know that I also did computer stuff. And while I was there, I'd be like, everything working okay with the computer, TV, phone, wristwatch, camera? Like, because I'm here and I could help with the thing. You know, my library was not the most tech savvy before COVID, and it was in some ways challenging for them. And some of that's not sure the best way, like some of that's a choice. Like my director is just like, I will never have a smartphone. And like, that's a pretty bold thing to say in 2024, especially when you run a library in a state. But that's how she feels, and that's how she feels. She's a good library director, but that's how she feels about technology. And so in some ways, that actually worked well for our community because the people who were digitally divided felt represented at the library. And that actually helps, right? It helps people feel seen, and it helps them feel represented. I did some learn about the internet. Learn about the internet, like what's on the internet classes for a library in Rochester, which is over the mountain from me, and it's a slightly smaller town, in February of 2021. So like, it's been almost a year, COVID, and it was the first online programming they had done. They just didn't do any other online programming. And it's been gratifying to see that since then, they did a lot more online programming because that one, I guess, worked. And libraries also work together in ways that we hadn't before, which is surprising because like we invented working together. But it was sort of a next level thing technology made possible. So we have a state association website, vermontlibraries.org. And we had a calendar of like events, but it normally was just Vermont Library Association events, like board meeting. But we found that because so many libraries were doing virtual programming, that meant that there didn't need to be geographic boundaries around where we did our stuff. And so, you know, with libraries' permission, like, hey, if your event is open to more people, can we share it with other libraries in the state? And then we can all sort of mutually assist each other with programming in these dark times when everybody could use a little bit more connection. And so then we used the Dippy calendar function on the website, and it became like a statewide Vermont library programs thing, which I found super gratifying, and it helped more people get more stuff for free as a real sort of community forward movement. And Vermont Humanities, who brought me here today, started doing online programming sort of very early on in sort of COVID, and now they do some stuff in person, some stuff hybrid, so that people who maybe just don't want to go out at night, don't want to come all the way here from somewhere else, don't live in Vermont maybe even, can come to this programming. And I just in general think that's a community forward move to make. And so one of the things, wrapping up, that made this work the most useful for me was also having some boundaries. Because it sounds like I'm just like, sure, I'll come over, I'll do whatever, I'll fix anything. Your problems are my problems. Not exactly. No, I won't call tech support for you. But I'll coach you how to make that call. Or I'm not going to type that letter for you. Like people would come in to drop in time and be like, I need to write a letter. And I'd be like, I can show you how to open up Microsoft Word on the computer. Well, I've got you. No. But I could teach them how to do dictation. And I can't tell you what computer to buy. Although, man, it is getting harder and harder to give people technology advice that isn't also shopping advice, right? Someone comes in, they have a problem with their cloud account on any of the cloud services, and part of their calculus is, well, do I want to pay $1 a month to Google or $2 a month to Apple, or I don't even know how much it costs, right? And I'm like, I can't make a money decision for you, but a lot of those decisions become money decisions. Help me find a cell phone plan. What? Like, those are money things, but those are technology things, and those are connectivity things nowadays. And so it's super tricky trying to figure it out. So I can't tell people what computers to buy, but I can help them see if something meets their specs. You know, most of the time, most computers are fine for most things, unless you have a very esoteric need out in one direction. You know, you edit video, you're a gamer. I have one lady who, like, she likes to record herself singing when she is in the car, and then she wants to download those recordings to her computer and then be able to sort of edit them in Audacity. It was very interesting for someone not very tech savvy like that, but that's her thing. And so she needed to make sure that, you know, she had a computer that could do that, and a phone that had enough storage space, and all that kind of stuff. And it can be hard if you're in a service profession and you help people with difficult problems to not give 110% so that you don't have anything left. And finding a balance. So what we say on the internet a lot is you put on your own oxygen mask before you help others with theirs, because that way you can breathe, right? Same thing. And knowing when to refer people to other places. You know, I think that there was a lot of like self-care concept of use sort of during COVID, when a lot of people were like, I'd really like to, but self-care. And you have to figure out how to draw that line. But for me, at least knowing that there was a line and that you could draw one was helpful for me to do the work when I was doing the work. And so last, this is one last quotation from Phil Agri. If you read his pamphlet, you'll basically get the entire gist of what I've been talking to you about for an hour. But I want to mention, to at least be mindful of access issues ongoing, is an awareness that COVID gave us and that we should hold on to. So I think most people, many people, are fully comfortable getting back to pre-COVID routines, but some people aren't, or they can't be. And they are also people in our community, and we should keep an awareness that the skills we learned, this way of interacting, being together, even when we can't, are now part of our forever toolkit, and part of that is because we still need them. So my last quote, I think about people like Marion and Shirley and Ronnie and Mel and Brian, who did get into his Bruins game, thank God, and Martha and Sally and John and other John and Connie and Irene. And each person who comes to drop in time or gets help from the library to just get maybe one step better at using the computer, they help all the other people in their communities. Maybe people who don't even come to the library. Like, shocker for me that those people exist, but they super exist. And we need to be aware that they do. And each time we say, yeah, something is possible, or hey, you can do that, or we can fix this, the more we help people, all the people in our communities, whether not just this particular cataclysm, but potentially others. The work I did in the very beginning of COVID really actually helped people who were under a foot of snow 3 weeks ago, right? Because they already had some of the tools that they needed to be slightly isolated and figure out how to sort of make connections. And then that helps everybody build resilience as we build skills and confidence. So thanks for coming out. I don't know if anybody has questions. That's me on Mastodon, if people want to catch up on social, or on Jessamyn at Gmail, and I will literally answer any technology question that I can answer there as well. And again, the web address, librarian.net/talks/BHC24. Links, image credits, and links to all the slides, which are all Creative Commons, so you're welcome to take them and use them yourself. Thanks.